I still remember the sound of champagne glasses clinking, violins playing softly, and 300 people holding their breath as Natalie Vaughn, the most feared billionaire in Chicago's tech scene, dropped to her knees in a custom Dior gown and asked my husband, Ethan Carmichael, to marry her. Leave your struggling, invisible wife and become my husband. Together, we'll rule everything. He looked at me just briefly, and then he smiled and said yes. The ballroom exploded in gasps, camera flashes, applause, but I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even flinch. I simply placed the gift I had brought, a $23,000 Omega timepiece, back into my clutch, stood up from the gala's head table, and walked out into the Chicago night with the only thing that truly mattered, my 61% ownership of EA, Veritas Neural, the company they thought they had just taken from me. But what unfolded next would leave everyone, from Ethan to Natalie to every single investor in that room, shocked beyond belief. They tried to erase me, but I didn't vanish. I rewrote the rules of the game, and this time I made sure they played by mine. The first time I met Ethan Carmichael, he couldn't code a simple, hello, world program. I found it endearing. This handsome business major with perfect teeth and practice charm, struggling to understand the basics of Java in our shared university workspace. I was already 3 years into my computer science PhD at MIT, and tutoring was just a way to pay for my grandmother's medical bills. You're a lifesaver, Vivian, he'd say, flashing that smile that made my analytical mind go fuzzy around the edges. I don't know how someone can understand this stuff. It's like you speak another language. I did speak another language, the language of algorithms, neural networks, and mathematical frameworks that would later become the foundation of what we built together. What I built, really. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony. My grandmother, weak but beaming with pride, whispered, "He's lucky to have found you." I believed her then. I believed in us. The idea for Veritas Neural came to me during a sleepless night in our cramped Chicago apartment. Ethan had just been laid off from his third startup job, and I was considering taking a tenure-track position at Northwestern. What if, I said, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above our bed, we could create an AI system that didn't just process data but understood the emotional context behind it? An algorithm that could detect not just what people say, but what they mean. Ethan sat up, instantly alert. You mean like emotion recognition for text? For social media? Much deeper, I explained, already seeing the architecture in my mind. A neural network that can detect deception patterns, emotional authenticity, and predictive behavior based on linguistic markers. 3 days later, I had coded the first prototype. 3 months later, we'd incorporated Veritas Neural with my grandmother's trust providing our seed funding, $1.2 million that I'd inherited when she passed away. I insisted on putting both our names on the incorporation papers, but made sure my 61% ownership was clearly documented. Not because I didn't trust Ethan, but because my grandmother's lawyer had insisted. "It's your inheritance, Vivian," he'd said. "Your grandmother wanted to protect you." For the first 2 years, we worked from our apartment. I coded 16 hours a day while Ethan networked, pitched, and charmed his way into meetings with potential investors. I didn't mind staying in the background. The code was what mattered to me. The elegant solutions. The breakthrough algorithms that could detect emotional patterns with unprecedented accuracy. The first time Ethan presented our work without mentioning my name, I told myself it was an oversight. The second time, I convinced myself it was a strategic decision. Investors in the tech world still responded better to male founders. By the third time, it had become our unspoken arrangement. Ethan was the face, the voice, the visionary. I was the architect working silently behind the scenes. Our big break came when Veritas Neural's algorithm correctly predicted consumer emotional responses to advertising campaigns with 87% accuracy, far beyond what any competitor could achieve. Suddenly, every major corporation wanted our technology. Our valuation hit $50 million, then $120 million. We moved into sleek downtown offices with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I upgraded our servers, expanded our engineering team, and refined the core algorithm while Ethan collected awards, gave TED Talks, and graced the covers of business magazines. The emotion prophet, they called him. Not once did he correct them. "It's just business, Viv," he'd say, loosening his tie after another gala where I'd been introduced as Ethan's wife, rather than co-founder and CTO. "Investors need a story they can understand, a face they can trust." I believed him because I wanted to, because I loved him, because the work itself, The elegant code, the mathematical beauty of the systems I was building, mattered more to me than the recognition. Then Natalie Vaughn entered our lives. I'll never forget our first meeting. Natalie was everything I wasn't. Tall, impeccably dressed in a white power suit, her dark hair cut in a severe bob that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. As CEO of Vaughn Holdings, she controlled billions in tech investments and had a reputation for ruthlessness that preceded her like a cold shadow. "I've been watching Veritas Neural," she said, her eyes barely acknowledging my presence as she spoke directly to Ethan across our conference table. "Your emotion recognition technology could revolutionize how my companies interact with consumers." "That's what we believe," Ethan replied smoothly. "Our system doesn't just analyze data, it understands human intention." "Your system," Natalie repeated, her eyes flicking briefly to me before returning to Ethan. "Tell me more." I opened my mouth to explain the complex neural architecture I'd designed, but Ethan smoothly cut in. "It's quite technical," he said with a practiced laugh. "But essentially, we've created an AI that can read between the lines of human communication." Natalie leaned forward. "I'm offering $50 million for a 25% stake and a partnership that could put Veritas Neural in every major corporation in America." I should have seen it then, the way she looked at him. Not as a business partner, but as an acquisition target. Not as a married man, but as a piece on her corporate chessboard. That night, as Ethan celebrated with expensive champagne, I voiced my concerns. "There's something about her I don't trust," I said, watching him loosen his tie with that familiar gesture that had once made my heart race. "She's a businesswoman, Viv. Tough, sure, but she's offering us everything we've worked for." He kissed my forehead. "This is it. The big leagues. We're going to change the world." What I didn't know then was how quickly my world would change. How within months, Natalie Vaughn would be in every meeting, every decision, every aspect of our company. How she and Ethan would start having private lunches, strategic discussions I wasn't invited to join. I was too busy perfecting our system's core architecture, preparing for our biggest release yet, a platform that could analyze emotional patterns across entire organizations, predicting everything from employee satisfaction to leadership effectiveness. Didn't see the signs until it was almost too late. I was too immersed in my code to notice that I was being systematically erased from my own company's story. The Royal Carlton ballroom glittered like something from another era. Crystal chandeliers cast honeyed light across marble floors, while Chicago's financial elite mingled in tuxedos and designer gowns worth more than my first car. This was Veritas Neural's coming out party, a gala celebration of our new partnership with Vaughn Holdings and our upcoming public offering. I stood alone near a pillar, feeling oddly invisible in my midnight blue gown, the most expensive dress I'd ever owned. 300 people filled the room, yet no one approached me. I watched Ethan working the crowd, his laugh carrying across the space as he introduced his technology to wide-eyed investors. Natalie Vaughn was never far from his side, her hand occasionally brushing his arm in a gesture that seemed both casual and possessive. "You must be proud," said a voice beside me. Sarah Min, our lead software engineer and the only other woman on our technical team, appeared with 2 champagne flutes. She handed me one. "I should be," I replied, taking a sip, "but I feel like I'm watching someone else's celebration." Sarah nodded, her eyes tracking Ethan across the room. "Everyone's talking about how he built the emotional recognition system from scratch. Quite impressive for someone who asked me last week how to fix a broken API call." I smiled despite myself. Sarah was one of the few people who knew the truth, who had seen me build Veritas Neural's architecture line by line, algorithm by algorithm. "Did you see the press release?" she asked, pulling out her phone. "Just went live an hour ago." The headline made my stomach drop. "Vaughn Holdings announces strategic partnership with Ethan Carmichael's Veritas Neural." No mention of me, not even as co-founder. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "Rumors about a restructuring. Engineers talking about new reporting lines, directly to Natalie's team." Before I could respond, the room's lighting dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the central stage. Ethan appeared, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his smile dazzling under the lights. "Welcome, everyone, to a night of celebration and new beginnings," he announced. Veritas Neural began as a dream in a small apartment, and now, thanks to Natalie Vaughn's vision and support, we're about to change the world. The crowd applauded. I took another sip of champagne, noting how cold it felt going down. "None of this would be possible without the extraordinary team we've built," Ethan continued, his eyes scanning the room but somehow never finding me. "And tonight, I'm honored to announce that Veritas Neural and Vaughn Holdings are not just forming a business partnership, we're forming a future together. The spotlight widened, revealing Natalie Vaughn ascending the stage steps. She wore a custom Dior gown that seemed to capture and reflect every light in the room, making her glow like some digital goddess. "Ethan has created something revolutionary," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "An AI that understands human emotion. But tonight, I want to talk about a different kind of emotion." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I felt something shift in the atmosphere, a collective intake of breath, as if everyone but me had been briefed on what was coming next. And then it happened. Natalie Vaughn, Chicago's most feared billionaire, the woman who had broken companies and careers with a single phone call, lowered herself to one knee in front of my husband. "Ethan Carmichael," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. "You've created a technology that understands the human heart, but I understand what you truly deserve, a partner who can give you the world." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small box. "Leave your struggling, invisible wife and become my husband. Together, we'll rule everything." The room froze. 300 people, glasses midair, conversations abandoned. Every eye turned to Ethan, and then, slowly, inevitably, to me. Ethan looked in my direction, just briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement. Our eyes met across the crowded room, across 6 years of marriage, across the company we had built together. Then he smiled at Natalie. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I will." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, camera flashes, scattered applause that quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. Natalie slipped a platinum band onto Ethan's finger, right over his wedding ring, the one I had placed there 6 years earlier. I felt Sarah's hand on my arm. "Vivian," she whispered, "let's get out of here." But I didn't move. I didn't scream or cry or cause the scene they had clearly anticipated. Instead, I reached into my clutch and touched the velvet box containing the Omega watch I'd bought for Ethan, $23,000 from my personal savings, to celebrate what I had thought was our shared success. I closed the clutch, straightened my shoulders, and did the one thing no one expected. I walked out, calmly, silently, with dignity intact. As the heavy doors of the Royal Carlton closed behind me, I pulled out my phone and sent 3 text messages. One to our company's legal counsel, "Initiate Protocol Athena, authorization VS61. One to our head of IT security, "Execute Phoenix Override, my authorization." And one to my personal assistant, "Gather all original incorporation documents. Deliver to residents immediately." Then I stepped into the cool Chicago night, knowing that while Ethan and Natalie celebrated what they thought was my erasure, I had just activated the failsafe protocols I had built into Veritas Neural's very foundation. They had forgotten one crucial detail. You can't steal what still recognizes its true owner. The night air felt clean after the stifling tension of the ballroom. I walked 16 blocks home, the rhythm of my heels against pavement matching my heartbeat, steady, determined, unbroken. Chicago's skyscrapers towered above me like silent witnesses to my humiliation and my resolve. My penthouse felt different when I returned. No longer ours, but mine alone. I kicked off my heels, unpinned my hair, and powered up my private workstation. The one Ethan never knew existed. The one connected directly to Veritas Neural's core infrastructure through channels only I could access. "Protocol Athena initiated," flashed across my screen. "Biometric confirmation required." I placed my palm on the scanner and looked into the camera. "Vivian Scott. Authorization, Founder Prime." Within minutes, my screens filled with confirmation messages. "Administrative access restricted. Financial protocols. Locked. Master database secured. Core algorithm isolated." By morning, Ethan and Natalie would discover that Veritas Neural's entire infrastructure had gone into what I called founder protection mode. The AI engine would continue running for existing clients, but all administrative functions, all financial transactions, all strategic decisions would require my personal authorization. I had built this failsafe during our second year, when our valuation first hit 9 figures. Not because I anticipated betrayal, but because I believed in protecting what I had built. The protocol was buried so deep in the system architecture that not even our senior engineers knew it existed. My phone began vibrating at 2:37 a.m. "Ethan, systems are down. What's happening?" "Ethan, it can't access the core servers." "Ethan, Vivian, this isn't funny. Ethan, call me now. I silenced the phone and opened my personal safe. Inside were the original incorporation documents, patent filings, and the trust agreement from my grandmother, the legal foundation of Veritas Neural that proved my 61% ownership. My laptop pinged with an incoming email from Natalie Vaughn. Subject: unfortunate. Misunderstanding time: 3:14 a.m. Ms. Scott, I understand tonight's announcement may have come as a surprise. While personal relationships evolve, business partnerships should transcend emotional responses. Whatever technical difficulties Veritas is experiencing must be resolved immediately. A car will collect you at 8 a.m. to discuss transition arrangements and appropriate compensation for your early contributions to Ethan's vision. Regards, Natalie Vaughn, CEO, Vaughn Holdings. I laughed out loud in my empty apartment. Early contributions. As if I were an intern who had made a few suggestions before the real work began. I drafted my response carefully. Ms. Vaughn, no car will be necessary. Veritas Neural's systems are operating exactly as designed, protecting the company's intellectual property from unauthorized access or control. As founder and 61% majority shareholder, I look forward to a 9 a.m. board meeting tomorrow to discuss recent unauthorized restructuring attempts and possible securities violations. My attorneys will distribute relevant documentation to all board members and investors within the hour. Until then, consider all system access temporarily suspended. Sincerely, Dr. Vivian Scott, founder and chief architect, Veritas Neural, Inc. I attached scanned copies of the incorporation documents, my patent filings, and a technical summary of the security protocols now in effect. Then I did something I'd never done before. I added the personal signature block with my full academic credentials. Dr. Vivian Scott, PhD, MIT. By 4 a.m., my inbox was flooding with panicked messages from board members, investors, and senior staff. Our main investor from Singapore threatened legal action. 2 board members demanded emergency meetings. Our CFO sent increasingly desperate requests for financial system access as payment processing began failing worldwide. I responded to none of them. Instead, I showered, changed into jeans and a simple black turtleneck, and prepared a pot of coffee. Then I sat at my kitchen counter and opened my personal laptop, not to work, but to write. For 6 years, I had let others tell Veritas Neural's story. Now I would tell the truth. I wrote a detailed account of the company's founding, my role in developing every aspect of its technology, and the systematic effort to erase my contributions. I included email exchanges, meeting notes, and code repository logs showing my authorship of our core systems. At 7 a.m., as dawn broke over Lake Michigan, I sent this document to 3 recipients: our entire company staff list, every board member, and Jessica Chen, the most respected technology journalist at the Chicago Tribune. Then I called Sarah Min. I need someone I can trust, I told her when she answered, voice groggy with sleep. Someone who understands what I've built. I've been waiting for your call, she replied, suddenly alert. The systems are in complete lockdown. Ethan is losing his mind. Security had to escort him out of the building when he tried to break into the server room at 4 a.m. I need you to meet me, I said. Can you come to Lakefront Park in an hour? And Sarah, don't tell anyone. At 8:30 a.m., we sat on a bench overlooking the water. The early morning joggers and dog walkers paid no attention to 2 women huddled together, speaking quietly. I'm offering you the role of CTO, I said, watching her eyes widen. Effective immediately. But Ethan will no longer be with the company, I finished. Neither will Natalie Vaughn have any role at Veritas Neural. I've documented extensive evidence of attempted corporate theft, misappropriation of funds, and securities fraud. The board is receiving this information as we speak. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. They'll fight back. Natalie has an army of lawyers. I smiled. Let them try. The company literally cannot function without my authorization. Every core system, every client interface, every financial protocol is locked to my biometric signature. I designed it that way from the beginning. That's... Sarah searched for the word. Brilliant. And terrifying. I never wanted to use it, I admitted. But I also never expected my husband to... I couldn't finish the sentence. To be a complete ass? Sarah offered. I laughed. A real laugh, my first since the gala. Yes, that. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, the board chair. It's starting, I said to Sarah. Are you with me? She nodded firmly. All the way. I answered the call and put it on speaker. Dr. Scott speaking. Vivian, came the strained voice of Harold Winters, our 70-year-old board chairman. We've received your concerning communications. The board has convened an emergency session. Your presence is requested immediately. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I replied calmly. And Mr. Winters? I'll be bringing my own legal counsel. I hadn't actually secured a lawyer yet, but they didn't need to know that. Sarah and I shared a cab to Veritas headquarters. As we approached the gleaming glass tower, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For years, I had allowed myself to be diminished, overlooked, erased. No more. The security guards, who normally barely acknowledged me, stood at attention as I entered the lobby. Dr. Scott, the head of security, greeted me with new respect in his voice. The board is waiting in the main conference room. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I saw them through the glass walls of the conference room. The full board, Ethan and Natalie Vaughn, all looking grim-faced and tense. Sarah squeezed my arm. Ready? I straightened my shoulders and nodded. Time to reclaim what's mine. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes tracked my movement as I took a seat at the head of the table, the chair usually reserved for Ethan. Sarah sat beside me, her tablet ready. Natalie Vaughn's perfect composure showed the first cracks I'd ever seen, a tightness around her eyes, a slight discoloration where her makeup couldn't quite hide a sleepless night. Ethan looked worse, tie askew, hair uncombed, the polished veneer completely stripped away. Vivian, Harold Winters began, his authoritative baritone now uncertain. We've called this emergency meeting to address the situation with Veritas Neural Systems and the concerning allegations in your communication. They're not allegations, Mr. Winters, I replied evenly. They're facts, supported by extensive documentation which you've all received. Ethan leaned forward. Viv, this has gone far enough. Whatever you've done to the systems— Dr. Scott, I corrected him. Please address me as Dr. Scott in this professional setting. His face flushed red. This is ridiculous. You're my wife? I believe recent events at the Royal Carlton suggest otherwise, I said, keeping my voice perfectly controlled. But we're not here to discuss personal matters. We're here to address attempted corporate theft, securities fraud, and gross mismanagement. Natalie Vaughn's lawyer, a razor-thin man in an expensive suit, cleared his throat. These are serious accusations. Without merit, Ms. Vaughn's investment and partnership offers have followed all legal protocols. I smiled. Have they? Let's review the facts. I nodded to Sarah, who distributed tablets to everyone present. Page 1. Original incorporation documents showing my 61% ownership of Veritas Neural. Page 2. Patent filings for our core technology, listing me as primary inventor. Page 3. Financial. Records showing my grandmother's trust provided 72% of the company's initial funding. We don't dispute your early involvement, Natalie interjected smoothly, but Ethan has been the driving force behind— Page 4. I continued as if she hadn't spoken. Email exchanges between you and Ethan, planning what you called founder restructuring without board approval. Page 5. Financial records. Showing Ethan has spent $9.2 million of company funds on business development that appears to be luxury vacations, personal shopping, and real estate investments. Ethan's face went from red to white. One of the board members, the representative from our Singapore investor, muttered something that sounded like an expletive. Page 6. I continued relentlessly. Documentation of 7 instances, where Ethan presented my technical work as his own to investors, including detailed technical specifications he couldn't possibly understand given his complete lack of technical training. That's enough, Ethan snapped, standing up. This is a tantrum because of personal issues between us. The company can't function with the systems locked down. Give us the access codes and we can discuss a generous severance package. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but pity. The company can't function without me, period. Not because of some security protocol, but because none of you understand how the technology actually works. I turned to the board members. Gentlemen, ladies, you've been misled. Veritas Neural's success isn't built on Ethan's charisma or Ms. Vaughn's investment. It's built on a breakthrough neural architecture that I designed and implemented. Every innovation, every patent, every line of core code came from me and my team, primarily Sarah Min, who I've appointed as CTO effective immediately. Harold Winters looked stunned. You can't make executive appointments without board approval. Actually, I can, I replied, as majority shareholder and under the emergency protocols in our corporate bylaws, Section 7.3, which I'm sure you've all reviewed carefully. I have full authority to make leadership changes in cases of provable fraud or conflict of interest. Natalie's lawyer was furiously flipping through documents on his tablet. Her perfect mask slipped further as she realized I had outmaneuvered them at every turn. This is a hostile takeover, she hissed. No, Ms. Vaughn, I corrected her. This is preventing one. Your plan to manipulate my husband, push me out of my own company, and seize control of technology you don't understand or own, that was the hostile takeover. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline for a moment, before turning back to face the room. I'm prepared to move forward in one of two ways, I said. Option 1, Ethan resigns immediately. Ms. Vaughn's investment offer is rejected. The current systems lockdown is lifted, and we continue operations under my leadership with a restructured executive team. No legal actions are pursued regarding the financial misappropriations or attempted corporate theft. And option 2? Harold Winters asked quietly. I release all documentation to the SEC, press charges for fraud and embezzlement, and maintain the system's lockdown until legal proceedings are complete, which could take years, I said calmly, during which time Veritas Neural would effectively cease to exist, and all current investments would be worthless. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. You're bluffing, Natalie said. Finally, you wouldn't destroy your own company. I built this company, I replied. I can build another. Can you afford to lose $50 million and face securities fraud charges, Ms. Vaughn? Can Ethan afford federal prison for embezzlement? Can any of you afford to explain to your investors why you allowed this situation to develop? Harold Winters exchanged glances with the other board members. One by one, they nodded almost imperceptibly. I believe, he said carefully, that option 1 would be in everyone's best interest. Ethan stood up abruptly. This is insane. You can't just— It's over, Ethan, I said quietly. You made your choice last night. Now live with it. The board needs time to discuss, Natalie's lawyer insisted. You have 1 hour, I replied. I've scheduled a press conference at noon. Either I'll be announcing Veritas Neural's new leadership structure, or I'll be explaining why the company is facing criminal investigation. I walked out without looking back, Sarah following close behind. In the hallway, she whispered, That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. It's just the beginning, I replied. By 11:45, my phone pinged with Harold Winters' message. The board accepts option 1, documents being prepared now. At exactly noon, I stood before a hastily assembled press conference in our headquarters lobby. Cameras flashed as I took the microphone. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Vivian Scott, founder and CEO of Veritas Neural. The weeks following what the tech press, dubbed the Veritas reversal, passed in a whirlwind of activity. Each morning, I woke at 5:30 a.m., meditated for 20 minutes, a new habit, and arrived at headquarters by 7. The early hours gave me precious time alone in the building, watching dawn break over Chicago, while I restructured the company I'd reclaimed. My first official act as publicly recognized CEO was reinstating 3 female engineers who had been quietly pushed out during Natalie's influence. My second was promoting Sarah Min to CTO with a compensation package that made her one of the highest-paid technical executives in the city. You realize people are terrified of you now, Sarah told me over lunch in my new office, the one Ethan had occupied, which I'd immediately stripped of his pretentious art collection and replaced with clean, minimalist furniture. Good, I replied, picking at my salad. Fear can be useful during transitions. Not just fear, she clarified. Respect. The engineering team is calling you the architect behind your back. In a good way. I smiled. I'll take that over Ethan's wife any day. The press coverage was relentless. Jessica Chen's explosive feature in the Chicago Tribune, the invisible genius behind Veritas Neural, was picked up by national outlets, sparking a broader conversation about female founders being erased from their companies' narratives. I declined most interview requests but agreed to a carefully orchestrated profile in Wired that focused exclusively on the technology, not the scandal. The board remained tense but cooperative. They had no choice. My ownership position was ironclad, and the company's value had actually increased after my takeover, as clients responded positively to the more transparent leadership and technical focus. Ethan vanished from public view. According to the settlement our lawyers had negotiated, he retained 5% of the company, but surrendered all operational roles and agreed to a 5-year non-compete clause. The $9.2 million he had misappropriated would be repaid through his remaining equity over time. I heard through industry channels that he had moved into Natalie's Lakeshore Drive penthouse, but their engagement announcement never materialized. 6 weeks after the gala, I received a plain white envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a handwritten note. Vivian, I understand now what I lost. Not the company, you. I threw away someone extraordinary for status and validation I didn't earn. There's no excuse for what I did, no explanation that matters. I just want you to know that I see you now. I always should have. I placed the note in my desk drawer without responding. Some betrayals are beyond words, beyond forgiveness, not because of hatred, but because the person who could forgive no longer exists. The woman I had been, the silent partner, the shadow architect, had died the night of the gala. The woman who emerged was someone else entirely. 3 months after reclaiming Veritas Neural, I made the decision that would define its future. And mine. You want to do what? Harold Winters stared at me across the boardroom table, genuine shock replacing his usual careful political mask. Transform Veritas Neural into a research-focused B Corp, I repeated calmly. 50% of our resources will be redirected toward healthcare applications, educational tools, and climate prediction systems. The other 50% will continue serving commercial clients, but with an ethical framework governing all implementations. The board members exchanged alarmed glances. Dr. Scott, our CFO, began cautiously. While we appreciate your vision, this would significantly impact our profitability projections. Investors expected Ethan Carmichael to be running this company, I interrupted. Things change. The question isn't whether we're doing this. The question is whether you want to be part of it. Harold Winters leaned forward. Vivian, Dr. Scott, you've proven your technical brilliance and legal position beyond doubt. But this feels personal, a reaction to recent events rather than a sound business strategy. I smiled. It is personal, Harold. This is why I built Veritas in the first place. Not to help corporations manipulate consumers or predict stock fluctuations, but to create something that makes the world better. I got distracted by Ethan's vision of success. I won't make that mistake again. And if the board disagrees? Asked one of the newer members. Then I'll buy out dissenting members at current valuation and find investors who share this vision, I replied. I've already had preliminary discussions with 3 impact investment funds who are enthusiastic about the direction. 2 weeks later, we announced Veritas Neural's transformation. 3 board members resigned and were promptly replaced by leaders from medical research, education technology, and environmental science. Our stock dipped initially, then steadily climbed as the market recognized the massive untapped potential in these sectors. Within 6 months, our healthcare division had developed a neural network that could detect early markers of neurodegenerative diseases in linguistic patterns, 3 to 5 years before clinical symptoms appeared. Our education team created an AI tutor that adapted in real time to children's learning styles, dramatically improving outcomes for students with learning differences. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by purpose rather than validation. My apartment became a place I visited rather than lived in. I cut my hair short, a practical chin-length bob that required no maintenance, and developed a uniform of black turtlenecks and tailored pants that eliminated daily decisions about appearance. You need a life outside these walls, Sarah told me one night as we reviewed code at 11 p.m., empty takeout containers scattered across my desk. This is my life, I replied without looking up from my screen. And I'm finally living it on my terms. But even as Veritas Neural thrived under my leadership, I felt something missing. The company was no longer just mine. It belonged to the patients whose lives were extended by our diagnostic tools, the children whose potential was unlocked by our learning systems, the communities protected by our climate modeling. 10 months after the gala night that changed everything, I made another decision. I called the board together one more time. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations, I announced. Sarah Min will assume the role of CEO, effective immediately. Harold Winters, who had become one of my strongest allies, looked concerned. Is everything all right, Vivian? Everything is exactly as it should be, I assured him. The company doesn't need me hovering over every decision anymore. Sarah is more than ready. I'll remain as chair of the board and chief scientist, focusing exclusively on our next generation of neural architecture. What I didn't tell them was that I'd found something I hadn't realized I was missing: space to breathe, to think, to rediscover who Vivian Scott was outside the walls of Veritas Neural and the shadow of Ethan Carmichael. I bought a small house in Evanston. Nothing extravagant, just a craftsman bungalow with a garden and a dedicated home office with views of Lake Michigan. I started running along the lakeshore each morning, watching the sun rise over the water. I joined a quantum computing research group at Northwestern, collaborating with physicists exploring the next frontier beyond neural networks. And slowly, carefully, I began dating again. Not tech entrepreneurs or business executives, but people who saw me clearly. A professor of theoretical mathematics, a children's book author, a civil rights attorney. None of these relationships became serious, but each reminded me that connection existed beyond ambition and achievement. 1 year to the day after the infamous gala, I received another envelope. This one contained a formal invitation. Vaughn Holdings cordially invites you to the annual Innovation Gala, Royal Carlton Ballroom, 7 p.m., April 15th. Someone, presumably Natalie, had handwritten across the bottom, "The past is behind us. Your presence would be appreciated." I stared at the invitation for a long time, memories of that night flooding back. The humiliation, the betrayal, the walk into the Chicago darkness that had ultimately led me back to myself. Then I took the invitation, tore it precisely in half, and dropped it into my recycling bin. Some invitations aren't meant to be accepted. Some chapters aren't meant to be revisited. And some victories are best celebrated quietly, in the peaceful solitude of a life reclaimed. The letter arrived on crisp cream. Stationery, delivered by private courier rather than regular mail. The return address belonged to Patricia Vaughn, Natalie's 78-year-old mother and the founder of Vaughn Holdings. Dr. Scott, I hope this correspondence finds you well. Recent events have brought your name to my attention in ways that merit further discussion. While my daughter and I have different approaches to business and personal matters, I believe you and I share common values that transcend current circumstances. I would appreciate the opportunity for a private conversation at your convenience. My driver can collect you, or we can meet at a location of your choosing. With respect, Patricia Vaughn. I read the letter 3 times, searching for hidden intentions or threats, finding none. Patricia Vaughn was a legend in Chicago business circles, one of the first women to build a billion-dollar company in the 1980s, known for ruthless efficiency but impeccable ethics. Unlike her daughter, she had never been implicated in questionable business practices. Curiosity won over caution. I called the private number included with the letter and arranged to meet Patricia the following afternoon at the Chicago Botanic Garden, neutral territory, public yet private enough for conversation. She was already seated on a bench near the Japanese garden when I arrived. A slender figure with silver hair cut in the same severe bob as her daughter's, though softened by age and natural waves. She didn't stand when I approached, and I realized why when I noticed the elegant cane resting against the bench. "Dr. Scott," she greeted me, her voice strong despite her apparent frailty. "Thank you for coming." I was intrigued, I admitted, taking a seat beside her. It's not every day one receives a handwritten invitation from Patricia Vaughn. A smile flitted across her face. I find electronic communication lacks certain nuances, much like people these days. She studied me with piercing blue eyes. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more hardened. After what my daughter and your ex-husband attempted, I expected someone consumed by bitterness." She gestured to the tranquil garden before us. "Instead, you suggested we meet here. Interesting choice." "I find natural beauty clarifies thinking," I replied. "Now, what did you want to discuss, Mrs. Vaughn?" "Please call me Patricia." She adjusted her position slightly, wincing. "Arthritis. The one opponent money can't defeat. I'll be direct, Dr. Scott. I've been watching your transformation of Veritas Neural with great interest. Your work in healthcare particularly caught my attention." I waited, sensing there was more to this meeting than professional admiration. "I have pancreatic cancer," she continued matter-of-factly. "Stage 4. The traditional treatments have failed, and I have perhaps 6 months remaining." "I'm sorry," I said genuinely. "But if you're looking for medical miracles, Veritas Neural isn't—" "I'm not seeking treatment," she interrupted. "I've made my peace with mortality. What concerns me is legacy, specifically the future of Vaughn Holdings after I'm gone." Now I understood. "You're worried?" "About Natalie's leadership." Patricia's mouth tightened. "My daughter has many qualities: intelligence, determination, ambition. What she lacks is vision beyond acquisition and control. The company I built has become a vehicle for wealth accumulation rather than innovation or progress. And this concerns me how exactly?" "I'm prepared to make you an offer," Patricia said. "Vaughn Holdings has a healthcare division that's been neglected under Natalie's leadership. I want to spin it off as a separate entity with independent governance and funding. I would like you to lead it. I blinked in surprise. You want me to work for Vaughn Holdings? After everything that happened? Not with, she corrected. As an equal partner with complete autonomy. The division would be renamed, restructured according to your specifications, and funded with an initial $2 billion endowment. Your neural technology combined with our medical research infrastructure could accelerate breakthroughs in diseases like mine. Not in time for me, but perhaps for others. I studied her face, looking for any trace of manipulation or hidden agenda, finding only straightforward purpose. Why me? I asked. Finally. Surely there are other technical leaders without such complicated history with your family. Patricia laughed softly. Because of that history, not despite it. You outmaneuvered my daughter, something few have ever done. You reclaimed your company without destroying it, and instead of using your power for retribution, you redirected it toward meaningful work. She paused. Also, I read your original research papers from MIT. Your mathematical models were elegant. I have a doctorate in applied mathematics myself, you know. I hadn't known that. Nothing in Natalie Vaughn's sharp, acquisition-focused approach suggested she came from academic stock. What does Natalie think of this proposal? I asked. She doesn't know yet, Patricia admitted. The board will vote on the spin-off next month. Natalie controls significant shares, but not a majority. With my shares and those of my allies, the resolution will pass regardless of her objection. You're deliberately undermining your own daughter, I observed. Patricia's eyes hardened momentarily. I'm preserving the meaningful parts of what I built while I still can. Natalie will inherit considerable wealth and power regardless. This is about ensuring some portion of Vaughn Holdings continues to serve a purpose beyond enriching shareholders. I considered her offer. Working with any part of Vaughn Holdings felt wrong after everything that had happened. And yet, $2 billion directed toward medical research, completely under my control, could accelerate Veritas Neural's healthcare work exponentially. I need time to consider, I said finally. Of course. Patricia handed me a slim folder. All the details are here, including the governance structure, funding mechanisms, and proposed research directions. Take 2 weeks. My contact information is inside. As we parted ways, she added, Dr. Scott, Vivian, whatever you decide, I want you to know I admire what you've built. Not just the technology, but the integrity behind it. It's a rare quality in our world. I spent the next 2 weeks in deep reflection, consulting with Sarah and our legal team, examining every aspect of Patricia's proposal. There were no hidden clauses, no Trojan horses, just a straightforward opportunity to expand our healthcare research with substantial resources. The deciding factor came unexpectedly. One of our early healthcare neural networks had been adopted by a small rural hospital in Wisconsin. Their head of neurology sent us a letter describing how the system had correctly flagged early-stage dementia in a 52-year-old patient, early enough for interventions that might slow its progression by years. Your technology gave someone back time with their family, the doctor wrote. There is no greater gift. I called Patricia Vaughn and accepted her offer, with conditions. The new entity would be completely separate from Vaughn Holdings in both branding and operations. I would have final approval on all board appointments, and 70% of any breakthroughs would be made available at cost to public healthcare systems worldwide. To my surprise, she agreed to everything without negotiation. 1 month later, Neura Health launched with the mission of applying advanced neural networks to medical diagnosis, treatment, and research. The press release made no mention of Natalie Vaughn, though Patricia was prominently featured as founding donor. 3 days after the announcement, I received a text from an unknown number. You've made an enemy for life. Not just business anymore. Personal. I didn't need to ask who it was from. I simply blocked the number and returned to work. Some threats aren't worth the energy of fear. What I didn't anticipate was how Patricia's mentorship would transform my approach to leadership. Unlike Ethan, who had sought validation through external recognition, or Natalie, who measured success through control, Patricia evaluated everything through the lens of lasting impact. Power is merely potential energy, she told me during one of our weekly strategy sessions. It only matters what you set in motion with it. Under her guidance, NeuroHealth expanded rapidly, attracting brilliant researchers who were drawn to our mission rather than compensation packages. Within a year, we had promising breakthroughs in early detection protocols for 8 major diseases and had established partnerships with research hospitals across 5 continents. When Patricia's condition worsened, I visited her at her Lake Forest estate. The once formidable business titan now seemed small against the white pillows of her hospital bed, installed in what had once been her sunroom. Was it worth it? I asked her. Building all of this, knowing you wouldn't see where it leads? Her eyes, still sharp, despite her failing body, held mine. The point was never to see the end result, Vivian. It was to set something meaningful in motion. You understand that now, I think. She died 3 weeks later. The funeral was small and private, just as she had wanted. Natalie delivered a polished eulogy that mentioned Patricia's business acumen, but nothing of her vision or values. I sat in the back row, observing rather than participating. Afterward, Patricia's longtime attorney approached me with a sealed envelope. She asked me to give you this privately, he said. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Patricia's personal letterhead, with a handwritten note. Vivian, by now you've realized that the greatest revenge isn't destroying what others build, but creating something they cannot touch or claim. What you've built will outlast all of us. There will be attempts to undermine Nura after I'm gone. The safeguards we've put in place should protect it, but remain vigilant. The greatest threat to meaningful work is always dilution of purpose, not outright opposition. My daughter may never forgive either of us. That is her burden to carry, not yours. With respect and confidence, Patricia. P.S. Check your Nura email. I've left you something that may prove useful. When I returned to my office, I found Patricia's final gift, access to Vaughn Holdings' private research archives, including decades of medical data that had never been properly analyzed. A treasure trove for our neural systems to explore for patterns and connections conventional research might have missed. That night, as I worked late integrating this new resource into our research platforms, I realized something had shifted within me. The anger and hurt that had fueled my initial reclamation of Veritas Neural had been replaced by something more sustainable, purpose beyond myself. I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I was creating, not in reaction to betrayal, but in alignment with my deepest values. The woman who had walked out of that gala a year and a half ago had been seeking justice. The woman I had become was seeking something greater, meaning that transcended personal vindication, and in that transformation lay a victory no one could ever take away. 3 years after the night that changed everything, Chicago's tech landscape had transformed dramatically. Veritas Neural, under Sarah Min's leadership, had grown into a billion-dollar enterprise focused on ethical AI applications. Neura Health, my primary focus, had developed breakthrough diagnostic systems being implemented in hospitals worldwide, and Vaughn Holdings had stumbled through a series of public missteps, its stock down 47% since Patricia's death. I rarely thought about Ethan or Natalie anymore. My days were filled with research, strategic decisions, and occasional guest lectures at Northwestern's AI ethics program. My small Evanston home had become a true sanctuary, a place where I could garden on weekends, host small dinners with carefully chosen friends, and work from my sunlit office overlooking Lake Michigan. The invitation to MIT's Alumni Achievement Awards ceremony arrived on a crispy October morning. I'd been selected to receive their Distinguished Innovation in Public Service Award for Neura Health's work. The ceremony would be held in Cambridge the following month, exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving. I hadn't returned to MIT since completing my PhD, and something about walking those hallways again felt like closing a circle. I accepted the invitation and booked my flight. The morning of my departure, I received an unexpected email. Dr. Scott, I understand you'll be in Cambridge next week for the MIT Awards. I'm currently teaching at Harvard Medical School and would appreciate the opportunity to meet briefly regarding potential research collaboration between our institutions. Our work on neural pattern recognition in cancer pathology might complement Neura's diagnostic systems. Respectfully, Dr. James Chen, Harvard Medical School. The name wasn't immediately familiar, but the research area aligned perfectly with our current priorities. I asked my assistant to schedule a coffee meeting during my stay. The MIT campus was both eerily familiar and strangely new as I walked its paths 3 days later. The same brick buildings stood where they always had, but new structures had risen among them, and the students looked impossibly young, all moving with purposeful energy, many wearing Veritas Neural or Neura Health branded hoodies and backpacks. One young woman did a double take as I passed, then whispered excitedly to her friend. I smiled and continued walking. The ceremony itself was predictably formal. Citations read, handshakes exchanged, polite, applause filling the auditorium. When my turn came, I approached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. The greatest privilege of scientific achievement, I said, is not recognition, but application. At NeuroHealth, we measure success not in patents or profits, but in lives extended and suffering prevented. This award belongs to every researcher, clinician, and patient who has contributed to our understanding of how neural networks can transform healthcare. The applause felt distant, almost unnecessary. The real reward had been the work itself, the complex problems solved, the elegant solutions discovered, the human impact of abstract mathematical models. The following morning, I met Dr. James Chen at a small cafe near Harvard Square. As I approached the table where a man sat with his back to the door, I felt a strange prickle of familiarity. When he stood and turned to greet me, I froze. It wasn't Dr. James Chen. It was Ethan. 3 years had changed him. The polished veneer was gone, replaced by a simpler appearance, glasses I'd never seen before, a beard sprinkled with gray, casual clothes instead of tailored suits. But his eyes were unmistakable. "Vivian," he said softly, "thank you for coming." I should have walked out immediately. Instead, I found myself asking, "James Chen?" "My mother's maiden name," he explained. "I thought you might delete the email if you saw my real name." "I would have," I confirmed, still standing. "This is inappropriate, Ethan." "Just 10 minutes," he said. "Please. Then I'll never contact you again." Against my better judgment, I sat down. 10 minutes. He nodded, visibly relieved. "I'm actually teaching at Harvard Medical School now." That part was true. Neuroscience research. No business, no startups, no tech industry. Why the deception to meet me? Ethan looked down at his coffee cup. "I've tried to contact you legitimately multiple times over the years. Letters, emails, all returned or blocked. I understand. Why, but I needed to say some things to you directly. Just once. So say them." I replied coolly. He took a deep breath. "First, I want you to know that Natalie and I ended 2 months after the gala. The engagement was a sham, part of her plan to control Veritas Neural. Once that failed, there was nothing holding us together." This information meant nothing to me now, but I nodded for him to continue. "Second, I've spent 3 years in therapy trying to understand why I betrayed the one person who truly believed in me, why I valued appearance over substance, recognition over integrity." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I've had to face who I really was, a fraud riding on your brilliance, too insecure to acknowledge the truth even to myself. And now you want forgiveness?" I stated flatly. "No," he said, surprising me. "I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. What I did was unforgivable. I'm here because I needed to acknowledge the truth to your face, just once. You were everything behind Veritas Neural. You were the genius, the visionary, the builder. I was just packaging." I studied him, looking for the manipulation, the charm offensive that had once been his trademark. I found only raw honesty. "Why Harvard Medical School?" I asked, genuinely curious. After everything fell apart, I went back to basics. What did I actually care about beyond status and recognition? My mother had early onset Alzheimer's when I was a teenager. Watching her decline was what originally drew me to your work on neural networks, though I never told you that. He smiled sadly. I went back to school, earned a legitimate PhD in neuroscience, and now I research neural degeneration patterns. No press, no fame, just meaningful work. I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but a certain symmetry. We had both found our way to work that mattered, through very different paths. "I saw the announcement about your MIT award," he continued. "I'm genuinely proud of what you've built with NeuroHealth. The diagnostic system your team developed for early Alzheimer's detection. We're using it in our research lab. It's revolutionary." "Thank you," I said simply. He glanced at his watch. "My 10 minutes are almost up. I just want you to know that seeing you build something meaningful from the ashes of what I destroyed has been instructive. You turned betrayal into purpose. I'm trying to do the same, in my own small way." As he stood to leave, he placed a small box on the table. "This belongs to you. I've kept it all this time as a reminder of what integrity looks like. Now it should go back to its rightful owner." After he left, I opened the box. Inside was the Omega watch I'd purchased for him years ago. The gift I'd put back in my clutch the night of the gala. I'd forgotten about it entirely. I closed the box and slipped it into my bag, feeling neither vindication nor closure, just a quiet acknowledgement that some chapters end without neat resolutions. Some betrayals change us permanently, and that change can ultimately lead us where we need to go. 2 days later, I received another unexpected meeting request, this one from, Sarah Min, who had flown to Boston specifically to discuss a matter she claimed was too sensitive for video calls. We met in my hotel suite overlooking the Charles River. Sarah, now a poised CEO with a confidence that had blossomed since taking Veritas Neural's helm, got straight to the point. Natalie Vaughn approached me with an acquisition offer, she said. Vaughn Holdings wants to buy Veritas Neural, $8.2 billion in cash and stock. I raised an eyebrow. That's substantially above market value. Exactly, Sarah nodded. They're desperate. Their AI division has failed to innovate, they've lost key clients to us, and their stock is tanking. This is a Hail Mary attempt to salvage Natalie's position. What did you tell her? Sarah smiled. That any acquisition would require approval from our chair of the board, you, and that I personally would recommend against it. I shook my head, amused by the circular nature of business. 3 years ago, she tried to steal the company through manipulation. Now she's trying to buy it through desperation. There's more, Sarah said, her expression turning serious. Our legal team discovered that Vaughn Holdings has been attempting to patent technology suspiciously similar to our core algorithms. They've been hiring away our junior engineers, trying to reverse engineer our systems. Industrial espionage, I murmured. Not surprising, but disappointing. We have enough evidence for a solid lawsuit, Sarah continued. But before we proceed, I wanted your input. This could get ugly in public. It might affect NeuroHealth by association, even though you've kept the entities separate. I considered the implications. A legal battle would consume valuable time and energy, resources better spent on meaningful work, but allowing theft of intellectual property set a dangerous precedent. Counter with this, I said finally. We won't pursue legal action if Vaughn Holdings agrees to a 10-year licensing agreement for specific, limited applications of our technology, with strict ethical guidelines and significant royalties directed to medical research. They get limited access to superior technology, we get funding for public health initiatives, and everyone avoids a protracted legal battle. Sarah's eyes widened. That's brilliant. They save face while essentially admitting defeat, and we turn attempted theft into public benefit. Exactly. And specify that Natalie Vaughn must personally sign the agreement, I added. I want her name on the document acknowledging that she's licensing technology from the company she once tried to steal. 3 weeks later, Vaughn Holdings announced a strategic partnership with Veritas Neural, corporate language that thinly veiled the reality of their capitulation. Pretty. Substantial licensing fees were directed to a new Veritas Foundation focused on bringing AI diagnostic tools to underserved communities worldwide. Natalie Vaughn never contacted me directly, but the business press noted that she stepped down as CEO of Vaughn Holdings 6 months later, citing personal reasons. The company's board replaced her with a research scientist who had previously worked at nonprofit medical institutions, a clear shift in direction that Patricia Vaughn would have approved. As for the Omega watch Ethan had returned, I didn't keep it. I sold it and donated the proceeds to an Alzheimer's research fund at Harvard Medical School, addressed anonymously to Dr. Ethan Carmichael's laboratory. Some gifts serve their purpose best when passed forward rather than held onto. 5 years after the night I walked out of the Royal Carlton Ballroom, I stood on a different stage, the grand opening of the NeuroHealth Research Campus on Chicago's South Side. The 10-acre complex, built on previously abandoned industrial land, housed advanced research facilities, a teaching hospital, and an innovation center where medical professionals from around the world could learn to implement our diagnostic systems. The audience included healthcare leaders, community members, researchers, and hundreds of patients whose lives had been extended or improved by early interventions made possible through our neural network diagnostics. Among them sat Mrs. Rivera, a 62-year-old kindergarten teacher whose pancreatic cancer had been detected 18 months earlier than conventional methods. Would have found it, the same disease that had taken Patricia Vaughn, but with a very different outcome. Today we don't just open buildings, I told the crowd. We open possibilities. Every algorithm we develop, every pattern we identify, every diagnostic breakthrough we achieve belongs not to shareholders or executives, but to humanity. Knowledge that can save lives should never be locked behind paywalls or profit margins. The applause washed over me, but it wasn't validation I felt. It was connection. These weren't admirers. They were collaborators in something larger than any individual. As I mingled with guests after the ceremony, a familiar figure approached. Sarah Min, who had remained both colleague and friend through all the transformations of our intertwined professional lives. Impressive speech, she said, handing me a glass of champagne. Though I noticed you didn't mention your pivotal role in any of this. The press release calls you founder and chief scientist, but everyone here knows you're the architect of everything we see. I smiled. Individual credit isn't the point anymore. The work speaks for itself. Speaking of work, Sarah continued, have you seen the latest results from the neural pattern study? We're seeing 94% accuracy in detecting depression biomarkers through language analysis alone, 3 years before clinical symptoms typically appear. I have, I replied. The applications for early intervention are extraordinary. We need to fast-track implementation in primary care settings. Sarah nodded, then hesitated slightly. There's something else you should know. The rumor mill says Ethan's research team at Harvard has made a significant breakthrough in neural regeneration pathways. Early stage, but promising enough that several pharmaceutical companies are pursuing partnerships. Good, I said simply, and meant it. The complex emotions that once surrounded thoughts of Ethan had long since resolved into something cleaner. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that talent redirected toward meaningful work benefited everyone, regardless of past actions. As evening fell, the campus lit up, soft lights illuminating the healing gardens, research buildings, and community spaces designed to make cutting-edge healthcare feel accessible rather than intimidating. I slipped away from the remaining guests and walked alone through the gardens, finding a quiet bench overlooking a small pond. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, the same view I had seen the night I walked out of the gala, but from a different vantage point now. 5 years had transformed not just my circumstances, but my understanding of success and purpose. Veritas Neural continued to thrive under Sarah's leadership, now a publicly traded company with a market capitalization exceeding $12 billion. My ownership stake had made me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined as a graduate student coding in a cramped apartment, but the money itself meant little to me now. It was simply fuel for the work that mattered. NeuroHealth had expanded globally, with research campuses on 3 continents and diagnostic systems implemented in thousands of healthcare facilities. The neural networks I had originally designed had evolved far beyond their origins, now capable of identifying disease patterns, treatment responses, and preventive interventions with accuracy that sometimes seemed almost prescient. My personal life had found its own quiet equilibrium. I had never remarried, finding deeper connection in close friendships and meaningful work than in romantic partnerships. My home in Evanston remained my sanctuary, the garden more established now, the office walls lined with research journals and mathematical models rather than business awards or press clippings. I had dated occasionally over the years, a thoughtful neurosurgeon, a brilliant climate scientist, a kind-hearted architect who designed healthcare facilities in developing countries. These relationships had brought warmth and companionship into my life without the need for permanent entanglement. I had learned that intimacy could exist without possession, connection without control. A soft footstep on the garden path interrupted my reflection. A young woman approached, perhaps 25, with determined eyes and the slightly disheveled appearance of someone who prioritized ideas over impression. "Dr. Scott?" she said tentatively. "I'm Maya Patel. I'm starting in the Neural Diagnostics Fellowship program next month." "Welcome to NeuroHealth," I replied, gesturing for her to join me on the bench. "What drew you to our program?" She sat, clutching a worn notebook. "Your 2018 paper on recursive pattern recognition in cellular degradation changed my entire understanding of computational biology. I was an undergraduate at Stanford, considering dropping out of computer science because everything felt abstract, disconnected from human impact. Then I read your work and realized that algorithms could literally save lives." I smiled, recognizing my younger self in her intensity. "And now? I've developed a theoretical model for applying your neural framework to autoimmune conditions," she said, opening her notebook to reveal densely written equations and flowcharts. "There are pattern recognition opportunities we haven't fully explored that could transform early intervention." I studied her notes, immediately grasping the elegant mathematical approach she'd developed. "This is promising work, Ms. Patel. Have you shared it with the research committee?" She shook her head. "I wanted to refine it further. And honestly, I wanted to show it to you first. Everyone says you still review every significant innovation personally, even though you don't have to." "Some habits are worth keeping," I replied. "Schedule time with my assistant tomorrow. We'll discuss how to develop this model further." As Maya left with renewed enthusiasm, I remained on the bench, watching lights come on across the campus. In this quiet moment, I realized what had truly emerged from the ashes of betrayal 5 years earlier. Not vengeance, not vindication, not even success in conventional terms. What had emerged was purpose unclouded by external validation, work that mattered beyond recognition or reward, and the opportunity to hold doors open for others, particularly young women with brilliant minds who might otherwise be overlooked or erased. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the silent architect working in Ethan's shadow to the builder of institutions that would outlast me. From a woman walking out of a ballroom with nothing but ownership papers and determination to someone whose work touched millions of lives. The losses along the way, my marriage, my illusions, my need for personal acknowledgement, had cleared space for something greater to grow. The betrayal that once felt like an ending had become merely a turning point in a much larger story. As darkness fell completely, I made my way back toward the main building where the celebration continued. Tomorrow would bring new equations to solve, new patterns to discover, new lives to potentially save. The work would continue, with or without recognition, because the work itself was what mattered. I had long since stopped being defined by what was taken from me. Now I was defined by what I chose to build. And in that quiet knowledge lay a victory more complete than any revenge could ever provide. Because the truth was simple. When you build something meaningful, something that serves a purpose beyond yourself, no one can truly take it away. Not with proposals or betrayals, not with schemes or acquisitions, not even with time itself. The real power was never in ownership documents or board votes or stock percentages. It was in the architect's vision, the ability to see possibilities where others saw only profit, to create systems that served humanity rather than exploited it. That was the legacy I would leave behind. Not the story of a woman who walked out of a gala after watching her husband accept another woman's proposal, but the story of what she walked toward, a future where the technology she created extended lives, relieved suffering, and opened doors for the next generation of builders. As I rejoined the celebration, greeting researchers and patients and community members with genuine connection, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had not just reclaimed what was mine. I had transformed it into something that belonged to everyone, and that was the greatest victory of all.